It was a chilly Friday night, and I was driving home from a friend's house. The clock on the dashboard read 11:43 p.m. The highway was empty, with only the occasional streetlight breaking the darkness. I turned up the radio to keep myself awake. That's when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. A sleek, black sports car was behind me, closer than I was comfortable with. Why is this car so close? I muttered to myself. I slowed down a bit, hoping the driver would pass me, but they didn't. Instead, they stayed right on my tail, matching my speed. I took a deep breath. Maybe they're just in a hurry and waiting for a chance to pass, I thought. So I put on my right blinker and pulled over to the side, giving them plenty of room to overtake me. But to my surprise, the car mirrored my move exactly, pulling over right behind me. "Okay, this is weird," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I decided to speed up, hoping to put some distance between us. The car followed, never more than a few feet away. My heart pounded as I accelerated, the engine roaring in the quiet night. The other car's engine roared back, matching my speed perfectly. I glanced at the speedometer, minus 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. No matter how fast I went, the car stayed right behind me. Panic started to set in. Why is this happening? What do they want? I swerved back into the right lane, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The black car followed, unwavering. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I needed to think of something, and fast. I spotted an exit sign up ahead and made a split-second decision. I veered off the highway, hoping to lose the car on the smaller winding roads. But as I exited, the car followed me. I felt my stomach drop. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling, and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? The operator's calm voice answered. Someone's following me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm on County Road 32, just off the highway. Please, you have to help me. Can you see the driver? The operator asked. No, the windows are tinted, I replied, glancing back at the car that was still there, tailing me closely. Stay calm. We have officers on the way. Can you find a safe place to pull over? I'll try, I said, my voice cracking. I drove for another few minutes, my eyes scanning for a gas station or any place with lights and people. I saw a diner up ahead, its neon sign flickering in the dark. I pulled into the parking lot, my tires screeching on the asphalt. The sports car followed. Then suddenly, without warning, it sped off, disappearing into the night. I sat there, shaking, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. Within minutes, 2 police cars arrived, their lights flashing. The officers took my statement, but there was little they could do. The car was gone, and I had no idea who was driving it or why they had followed me. One of the officers, a tall man with a kind face, tried to reassure me. We'll patrol the area, ma'am. If you see that car again, call us immediately. I nodded, still in shock. As I drove home with a police escort, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every pair of headlights in the distance made my heart race. Even now, I can't stop thinking about that car. Who was driving it? Why were they following me? I may never know the answers, but the fear and uncertainty have stayed with me, haunting my every drive down a deserted highway. My friends and I were always on the lookout for something thrilling to do on weekends. That night, we decided to attend an underground street race. Known for its high stakes and dangerous competitors, the race promised an adrenaline rush like no other. We arrived at an abandoned industrial area, where the race was set to begin. The air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. Engines roared, and people crowded around, placing bets and cheering for their favorite racers. I felt a mix of excitement and unease. Are you sure this is a good idea? I asked my friend Jason. Don't be such a wuss, he replied, grinning. It's going to be epic. The race began with a deafening roar. Cars sped down the makeshift track, blurring into streaks of color. I watched, my heart pounding, as the drivers pushed their cars to the limit. But then, something went horribly wrong. One of the cars, a sleek black machine, spun out of control. It skidded off the track, heading straight for the crowd. People screamed and scattered, trying to get out of the way. The car crashed into a group of spectators, sending bodies flying. I stood frozen, my mind unable to process the chaos unfolding before me. Amid the wreckage, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. A figure in racing gear, almost ghost-like, stood by the wrecked car. Their helmet glinted under the streetlights, and then before my eyes, they'd vanished into thin air. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Jason, my voice trembling. "See what?" he asked, his eyes wide with shock. "The figure by the car. They just disappeared." I insisted. "You're seeing things, man," Jason said, shaking his head. "It's just the adrenaline." But I knew what I saw. The police arrived soon after, trying to control the chaos. Paramedics tended to the injured, and the area was cordoned off. As the crowd dispersed, whispers and rumors began to spread. "Did you hear? People say there's a ghost haunting the race." "Yeah, they say it's a vengeful spirit of a racer who died years ago, punishing anyone who dares to race here." I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread. I kept replaying the scene in my mind. Who was that figure? Why did they vanish? Later that night, as we sat in Jason's car, the conversation turned back to what happened. "Do you really believe there's a ghost?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who knows?" Jason said, staring out the window. "But one thing's for sure, I'm never coming back here." The ride home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The thrill of the race was overshadowed by the horror of what we'd witnessed. I couldn't help but wonder if the stories were true. Was there really a spirit haunting the race? And if so, what did it want? Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night never left me. Every time I heard the roar of an engine or smelled gasoline, I was transported back to that moment. The image of the phantom figure vanishing into thin air haunted my dreams. I'll never forget that night, nor the chilling sense that something beyond our understanding was at play. The underground race, once a source of excitement, became a tale of terror that I couldn't escape. It was a cold, lonely night on the highway, and I was driving home from a long trip. The road stretched out endlessly, dark and empty. Suddenly, I saw a figure up ahead, standing on the side of the road. A hitchhiker out here in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down and pulled over. "Need a ride?" I asked, leaning over to open the passenger door. "Yes, please." "Thank you," he said, climbing in. He was a young man, maybe in his early 20s, with an old-fashioned look about him. His clothes were outdated, like something from the 1950s. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Just up ahead." "Please, we need to hurry," he replied, his voice urgent. I nodded and started driving again. The hitchhiker seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about him. His eyes darted around nervously, and he kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard. "Why are you in such a rush?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "I have to be somewhere. It's very important," he said, almost pleading. "Please, can you go faster?" I pressed down on the gas, the car speeding up. The hitchhiker's anxiety was infectious, and I felt my own heart rate quicken. As we drove, I couldn't help but notice his clothes more closely. They weren't just old-fashioned. They looked worn and tattered, like they had been through a lot. "Where did you come from?" I asked, curious and a bit uneasy. "I was traveling," he replied, his voice distant. "Just trying to get home." We sped along the desolate highway, and I noticed the air inside the car growing colder. I glanced at the hitchhiker again, and his face was pale, almost ghostly. Suddenly, he turned to me with a frantic look. "You need to go faster. Please," he shouted. I floored the gas pedal, the car roaring down the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Then, out of nowhere, the hitchhiker began to laugh. It was a strange, echoing sound that sent shivers through me. "What's so funny?" I asked, my voice shaking, but he didn't answer. Instead, he continued laughing, the sound growing louder and more chilling. I glanced over at him, and he was gone. The passenger seat was empty, and only the eerie echo of his laughter remained. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The car skidded to a halt, and I looked around wildly. There was no sign of the hitchhiker, just the dark, empty road stretching out behind me. Breathing hard, I drove home in a daze. The next day, I told a friend about the hitchhiker. He looked at me, eyes wide with shock. "That sounds like the guy who died in a car accident on that highway years ago," he said. "They say his spirit still haunts the road, trying to get home." A cold dread settled over me. I knew what I had seen, and I knew I would never forget the ghostly hitchhiker and his chilling laugh.